Ladies and gentlemen, Huba from Nuffic and Neso in South Africa. Maybe you are going to explain a little bit on what Nuffic Neso does in 2 sentences, if that's okay. And Huba is going to share some information about the region of Southern Africa. So we started with the social enterprises, and now we connected to the region. Huba, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Marco. Yeah, that's perfect. And indeed, I am going to pivot a little bit to what you've been hearing. Maybe a little bit less inspirational and more informational, but maybe I can surprise you a little bit of what's really happening on the African continent. So I am Huba Boshoff. I'm the head of Nuffic Neso South Africa. What does that mean? It means that I run the office for Nuffic, which is the Dutch education agency here in Pretoria. So it's wonderful to be sitting here at my now home office in Pretoria, talking to what I suspect is an audience in various parts of both the continent and other parts of the world. So I wish actually that I could be standing in front of you and see some of your faces, because what I see in front of me now is my own screen. I have my phone propped up so that in some way I can engage with you in a few seconds through a word cloud. And then I've tried to put up some notes. So I feel fairly disconnected from where I am. What does Nuffic do in South Africa? Let me talk about that for 2 minutes. We look at the broad scope of international activities, and how I got involved in today was exactly because of one of those activities where I met Marco. It's called the Co-Create My City initiative, that looks at city challenges and student groups to solve those city challenges in joint groups. And we did that last year in November. And actually we will launch the 2nd phase of that program tomorrow. So I've been asked today to speak about Sub-Saharan Africa. And I said yes very quickly because it's one of my fatal flaws. I struggle to say no. And when I started thinking about it, I realized that this is actually a mammoth task. So let me start with a disclaimer. I am not a political scientist. I am not an economist. I am not an historian, but I am an African, and a passionate one as is. So it's from that point of departure that I am going to try today to take you on the proverbial swallow flights across the region and share with you some insights on just why the future is Africa. So what I want to try and do, and I'm going to do this in a fairly old school way. So I've got my phone propped up next to me so that I can see the Q&A. I would like you to, in the Q&A, pop some words that come up when you think about Africa. And I've put some pictures there to inspire you a little, but don't be scared. Any word that you think of when you think of Africa. And while you give it 1 second to think, I am going to switch screens so that I'm on a Wordle that we can create together. Okay, I don't see any. John, I've noted your question. I will connect you. I don't see any. Does nobody have a word that comes up when you think about Africa? Nothing. The good, the bad, the ugly, or is it just not coming through on my side yet? Okay, I'll break the ice. I'll put a word up that people think about when they think of Africa. And I think you should still be able to see my screen. Yeah, there we go. Thanks, John. Okay, what else? If you think of the natural landscape of Africa, what do you think about? Okay, I see diverse. I'm going to put it all together because otherwise it splits us. Resource rich. Yes, indeed. And we'll talk a little bit about that. You've already heard about it. Wildlife. Tribe. Tribe or tribes? Can I go tribes? Beauty. Come. I'm pretty sure there's more people and I see familiar names. One more. Is it a go? Is this really all you think about? If this is all you think about, whoa, there I see history. Great. Yes, indeed. Color. Yes. Mighty warriors. Yeah, indeed. The picture that you see is of Zulu warriors in South Africa. All right. If these are the only words that you can come up today, then maybe it's good that I am part of this conference to give you a little bit more insight into what is happening on this continent. So I will add this to the presentation and then I will share it with you and that you can have it afterwards. Oh, I see colonization. I see stereotypes coming through. Gold. Yes, we'll talk about gold as well. All right. So let me switch back. Yes, so indeed, what you see here in front of you is some of the richness of Africa, the food, the beaches. Yes, this is off the coast of Mozambique. The warriors, these are the Zulu warriors, and some of the beautiful beads. And full disclosure, the picture of the fabric is my own picture because that is one of my biggest loves, African fabric. So let's get back to Sub-Saharan Africa. And if we think about Sub-Saharan Africa, it is literally loosely all the countries below the Sahara Desert. And of course, the Sahara Desert is the biggest desert on the continent, but also one of the biggest in the world. And so that is that geographical area. And here is where it becomes funny. Some will include Sudan in this definition, like the World Bank, and others, like the OECD, will not necessarily categorize Sudan as part of Sub-Saharan Africa. That aside is really not, this gives you the broad idea of the scope of Sub-Saharan Africa and what people loosely refer to as Sub-Saharan Africa. It constitutes 80% of the countries on the continent. And with such a big number, you will excuse me if I go about loosely with the term Sub-Saharan Africa and maybe also refer more broadly to the continent in general when we get to the rest of this presentation. But what makes this so interesting is the population. This continent that you see in front of you, all of the diversity of it, constitute for more than 1 billion people, and it's constantly growing. Roughly 50%, and this is what's amazing, and I think it will appeal to the audience, even though I don't have your details in front of me, is that 50%, roughly 50% of the population is under the age of 25. So it's mostly your peers, all those that you teach, no? And meaning that that is where the future lies. So, and it's expected that if we continue this growth, which even with recent growth rates in population, the African continent will account for 1/4 of the world's population. So think of that again, the world's population. So when you look at that world map again, this is where the people really get together. But also, then we talk about things like the Sahel. Some of you might have heard the Sahel, especially within the Dutch context. You hear the Sahel a lot. What is the Sahel and why is it significant? Now, when you look at this, it's obvious. It's the kind of the part that distinguishes Africa from the Middle East. But it is unfortunately also a part of the world for which it's known for things like famine and drought, human trafficking, and this is also why it's often in the news and why it links many times to stereotypes, as we've also seen in what people associate with Africa. Another grouping in the Sub-Saharan region that people often refer to is the Horn of Africa. Again, unfortunately, the reasons why the Horn is important and why people look at it is for the instability in the region. And then let's move a little bit closer to home, SADC, the Southern African Development Community. Now, other than the other two that I've mentioned, SADC, Southern African Development Community, is actually a physical organization with headquarters in Botswana. And the goal of this regional community is really to look at deepening collaboration, at peace and security in the region. And you will see various countries that are also known for unrest, Rwanda, Burundi, Congo, DRC included in this area. But let's look a little bit at the cooperation. What is significant about the cooperation in the area that I have worked in for the past 12 years is really in education. There's a SADC protocol that enables students within the region to travel with more ease, I should say, caveat that, between countries. So within South Africa, there are about 65,000 students from SADC that constitute 75% of international numbers and about 3.5% of all students enrolled in higher education in South Africa. So you will see how the exchange of students to South Africa also have an impact on what is possible and how the region is viewed. But all of this is part of how people group countries together. I want to pivot a little bit more towards the regional geographical groupings and then give you a little bit of a snapshot on a few countries. And actually, you've heard a little bit about some of these countries already. And I wish I could go into depth in many of these countries. As I say, there is so much to do. We can have taken this from a historian perspective to actually looking at some of the youth challenges. So let's start with West Africa. 17 countries. I see, richest person ever lived on the world is currently one of the richest people lives in Nigeria. So yes, but what is West Africa really known for? You've already heard it. Enzo said it earlier, cocoa. Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire are all major producers of cocoa. And whilst this shows how the raw commodities on the continent is available, very little of consumer goods is made on the continent. So we export the raw commodities and we bring back consumer goods. And that is one of the growth areas in the next 20, 30 years. West Africa, like some East Africa as well, is really increased urbanization. And that is both an opportunity and a challenge. And so, for example, we see major challenges within cities, and that is why we also work within city challenges, is how do we solve it, but also how do we identify a potential city challenge before it actually starts. So for example, in South Africa, the plan is to build a new smart city. So that is an interesting challenge. What does a smart city look like in South Africa? So always consider the context. And then to give you an idea, Nigeria in West Africa is the largest economy in Africa. But to contextualize that more, it's the 27th largest economy in the world. And we'll get back to some of the why is this significant. So let's fly right across to East Africa. These are some of my favorite countries on the continent. Of course, there's still much more to explore. But this is really an area highlighted by agriculture. It's one of the major sectors of employment, and for the Dutch on the call, it's also one of the areas where there's the most projects involved in the sector of agriculture. So what do we find in East Africa? And let me maybe say people have different views on East Africa, and when we go to Southern Africa now, you'll see that now suddenly the countries are mixed up. So in some definitions, we won't include Mozambique, Zambia, and Zimbabwe, and in others it is included as part of the region. So in this region, we find commodities such as coffee, cut flowers. So cut flowers is the biggest export in Tanzania and in Kenya, and it goes to the Netherlands. So really, there's a lot of linkages already existing in these commodities. Then we look at Southern Africa, my home. So you see there, this is very shady. We can go from the really hardcore definition of only 5 countries, 6 countries if you include Eswatini, the Kingdom of Eswatini. But this is very often known as some of the most developed parts of the continent. South Africa in itself hosts the biggest port in Africa, the port of Durban, also the sister port of the city of Rotterdam. It's very rich in natural resources. So I saw in the chat, you said gold. Yes, South Africa is known for gold, diamonds. Zambia is known for copper. We're known for uranium. So all of these resources we have. It is also an area very rich in agriculture. Zimbabwe was always one of the biggest exporters of tobacco. So all the sins of the fathers. And within this, South Africa is a dominant economic power. And even having said that, it does not mean it's a country without social problems. So then, why, if we have all these regional interesting, how do we bring it together? How do we pull it together within Sub-Saharan Africa? And for me, when I think of Africa, I think of a continent of contrasts. So some facts. If you think of the continent and you think of how many people I've just mentioned just in Sub-Saharan Africa, so the whole continent is even more than that, 93% of Africans have access to a mobile phone, and most Africans have multiple phones. I have one phone. I have 5 SIM cards because I travel between countries and it's quite difficult to connect between countries. But less than 2/3 have access to piped water. So let that sink in. If you think in terms of dollars, the collective GDP, and I tried to write this out, the trillion in zeros, and it was a lot of zeros. So, but yet 1 out of 3 people still live in poverty. And the global poverty line is about €1.50 per day. Now, I don't know what you have been up to today, but I know from my own time in the Netherlands that by the time that I get to almost 5 o'clock in the evening, I have definitely spent more than €1.50, and not necessarily on necessities. If we look a little bit at gender, the previous speaker also referred to gender and the importance of women within the economy, is that 62% of economic goods are produced by women. So let's think of that. To all the male colleagues, I'm not a feminist, I'm just mentioning this, but only 8.5% are salaried, and most receive a salary much lower than their male colleagues. If we think of people on this continent, the continent is home to revolutionists such as Elon Musk, who I'm sure you know, he's a South African, Trevor Noah, the now based in America comedian, and Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, who was the first female African head of state. And yet 1/3 of the population over the age of 15 cannot read or write, still illiterate. So as you can see, a complete continent of contrast, many challenges. So why does this excite me so much? And why am I working in the space of education within Africa? 2 words, potential and opportunity. 7 out of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world is based on the African continent. It is the largest free trade area in the world, and this is quite new, recently signed, which really enables trade between the countries, and then also reflecting back on the Southern Africa Development Community, really enhancing that cooperation. We have also now seen what the effect of the transformational technologies of the 4IR can be on the continent, and actually there will be some interesting research released on the digitalization agenda between the African Union and the European Union. And what does all this tell us? That with innovation, there is a lot of opportunity. And despite all the challenges and contrast, there are wonderful things happening on this continent. So let me give you one example from the Sub-Saharan Africa region. It's called M-Pesa. M-Pesa was born in Kenya. It is a Swahili combination. The M is for mobile and Pesa is the Swahili word for money. And it's a mobile money transfer service. This is available to people all over. It initially started, like I mentioned, in Kenya, and it's now spread through East Africa. It's also active in South Africa and even Afghanistan. And it's been growing since 2007. So why is this significant? The one reason why this is really significant is that the fact that cash is king. And suddenly you have people using an online application that gives them access to financial services in very remote areas of African countries. It is also low cost. There's still a value based for those that develop M-Pesa. There's a small fee, it's very small actually, but it makes it accessible. M-Pesa has also been transferred in a way that people can save money towards services such as funerals and public health. So it really has linked a social challenge of people not having access to financial services much broader. So this is but one example. 2 other examples that you might find interesting that's also really tagged as social enterprises is Crop to Cash. You will see, like I mentioned before, this is really very much in the agricultural sector, connecting small-scale farmers to financial services. It's one of the biggest challenges for small producers is how to gain access to financial services and also be financially literate. Easy Solar. The woman that developed this was actually named as one of the most influential people under the age of 30. It's a pay-as-you-go solar energy, so please read up about it. Energy is also one of the biggest challenges on the continent. And then, of course, I have to have a South African example on more also linking to the circular economy, really on linking recycling and waste management. So really, if we think of how much potential is on the African continent and the examples that you've already seen, I hope that in the future you will also find ways to connect with Africa and South Africa. And if you are interested to learn more about the things that we do in Neso South Africa, there's some examples to just show the contrast of this wonderful continent. If you're interested to learn more, if you want to hear also about the projects that we are involved in on the African continent, or how some of you can join projects in South Africa and the bigger region, please feel free to also reach out to us and follow us. And thank you again for this opportunity, Marco.